Good evening, ghouls. I bid you welcome. We are back for another episode of Horror Chats. Hi, I'm Haley Adams, and if you're new here, welcome. I hope you like all things spooky and macabre, and if you do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. And if you're a returning victim, I hope you're as much of a vampire apologist as I am, because we excuse their actions heavily on this channel. Okay, let's get into it. Like I just said, we're back for another episode of Horror Chats, a series I do here on my channel where I sit here and chat about horror movies, and presumably you listen, I hope. We cover everything from the amazing to meh, and just what's in between that as well. Basically, if it strikes my fancy in any sort of way, we're going to talk about it. And today's subject is the Mac Daddy of all vampire films. We are talking about Todd Browning's 1931 film, Dracula. It's my boo thing. We're going to get into the plot. If you don't want spoilers for a movie that came out in 1931, you can go ahead and just skip a little bit further into the video, but let's get into the plot. So the movie opens with Renfield, played by Dwight Frye, on his ill-fated journey to Castle Dracula in Romania. So we see him in this carriage bumbling along with a lot of Hungarians, because apparently at the time Hungary was like part history, you know. They're all Hungarian and they're all just like muttering, and they get to this little inn and Renfield's like, "Hey, what are we doing?" Because the carriage stopped and is like taking everybody's stuff out. He's like, "I need to keep going." And they're like, "No, no, no. We don't go out at night." And it's like, "Are you a bunch of weenies?" He's like, "No, I need to get to where I'm going. There's a carriage coming to get me in Borgo Pass." And everybody's like, "You want to die?" "No, no, no, don't do it." But he's like, "I'm doing it." So he reluctantly gets the carriage driver to take him to the meeting point, and that is pretty much all the further that this man goes. He literally throws Renfield and all his shit out of his carriage. It's like, see ya. Luckily, the carriage that is supposed to meet him is there, but Renfield's like pretty weirded out, and this driver, he's just sitting up there silently, and it's like, Renfield's like, "Can I get in?" He's like, the driver, which little does Renfield know, is Count Dracula himself, played, of course, by the amazing Bela Lugosi. He's just like, "Get in." And Renfield's like, "Okay." So they take off, and driver's driving way too fast, so Renfield kind of wimps out. He like sticks his head out the window, and he's like, "Hey, can you like slow it down a bit?" But the driver's not there. It's this giant bat kind of just leading the horses, and Renfield's just kind of like, "Huh." Just goes back in the carriage. I mean, what else is he gonna do, really? But he's just like, "Yeah, okay." So this carriage does make it to the castle. Renfield gets out. Carriage takes just the hell off again. What's going on round here? And he walks inside, where he is greeted by Count Dracula as himself. And let me tell you, this man, charming as hell. So polite, so welcoming, he's waxing poetic about wolves howling in the night. He's walking through spider webs with ease. Just, I'm sold. I don't know what everybody's so bugging about. But anyway, Renfield's all apprehensive because this castle's really dirty. But Dracula's like, "Nah, come on, come on." Takes him into a clean room. So Renfield starts to relax a bit, and they get down to the business that brought him there in the first place, which is the Count's purchase of Carfax Abbey back in London. Now, you youngins, yeah, back in the day, you wanted to buy a house? Oh, that guy had to come to you. There was no Zillow. I imagine in today's world, Dracula really likes Zillow. Doesn't have to deal with all this nonsense. So, you know, they get the paper signed. Things are a bit weird, but Renfield's like, he's polite, I guess. So everything seems to be okay. And then Dracula's like, "Okay, you go night-night now." So Renfield's like, "Okay, I go night-night." But not really, because Dracula leaves. Renfield's about to get in the bed, but then the giant bat is back at the window. If you haven't figured it out yet, the giant bat is Dracula. Just in case you were confused, he's back at the window. So Renfield's like, "What the hell?" He goes over, he opens it up, and then he's Dracula, and then here come the wives, because Dracula's Mormon. I can't say that. I apologize. He's not Mormon, but he has 3 wives. So the three wives and then Dracula, they all converge on Renfield, who has passed out, and now it's implied that this is where the crazy orgy happens. Just kidding. No, you guys know that they had to edit this movie a little bit because studios at the time thought it was super gay to see Dracula snacking on Renfield. We've come so far, but have we? Have we really? Anyway, it's implied that this is where they drive the poor man nuts, essentially. So next we see Renfield and Dracula. Dracula just up and leaves his three wives. Like, they're just never discussed again. He leaves them, and they are on a ship heading to London. Not the Demeter. For whatever reason, they wanted to call it the Vesta instead, but if you have read the book, you know what happens. Dracula basically kills everyone on board throughout the journey. The ship washes to port. It's a literal ghost ship. We find the captain. He is tied to the wheel, dead, holding a crucifix in his hand. Of course, they can't show that because it's 1931 and people would have a coronary, but it's implied that that is where he is. The only survivor, they think, is Renfield, who the police find giggling below deck. I love him. So while poor Renfield is being carted off to Dr. Seward's sanatorium, Dracula decides it's time to go to the theater. He's like, fuck you, Renfield. I want to go see a play. So he does, and this is where he hypnotizes his way into Dr. Seward's box. His theater box, guys, come on. Theater box. This is where we really start to veer off path from the original source material, so everything just that the book did is completely out the window at this point. But we've got the same players, and this is where he meets them. So in this version, Dr. Seward, he is an older man, and he's Mina's father for whatever reason. Mina is still Mina. She's still engaged to Jonathan Harker, except we call him John, not Jonathan. I don't know. Lucy's there. She's family friend as always, but her name is Lucy Western in this one. I guess they found Westernra as hard to say as I do. That's a hard name. She does not get nearly the arc she deserves in this movie, but Dracula, he hypnotizes his way into this box. He's like meeting everyone. Dr. Seward leaves, and Dracula just starts saying a bunch of odd shit. And Lucy is the Haley in this situation, the me, because she just finds this man utterly fascinating. She's just ignoring all the red flags. She's like, tell me more. So and then the play comes back and he has to be quiet, but he's just kind of staring at them. It's really funny. So later that night, Dracula gets to snacking on Lucy. And then the next day we see that they have tried to do a shit ton of blood transfusions on her because she lost a shit ton of blood, but they didn't work and she just died. And that's like where her story ends. We get a little blurb later in the film of somebody reading a paper where there's an article about kids talking about the woman in white trying to eat them in the night, and if we've read the book or seen literally any other movie, we know that was Lucy. But what's really funny about this is it's just not discussed again, and she isn't killed like she normally is. So in this universe, Lucy is still just a vampire eating kids all throughout London. No one did anything about her, but good for her. She gets to just eat them kids. Yeah, we don't get to see that on screen at all because 1931, having a baby eater on screen, are you kidding me? That was not going to happen. Now back to everyone's favorite, Renfield. You thought I was going to say Dracula. Well, they're tied in my heart. I love them both. Back to Renfield. He's in Dr. Seward's sanitarium, and this is where we learn like the extent of his new cuckoo-ness. And he just really wants to eat bugs. All he wants is to just consume little lives. That's what he wants, which, like, let him. I appreciate that in this version they left out that he really wants to eat a kitten. An actual kitten, you nasty perverts. Oh, by the way, about the sanatorium, it's just part of Dr. Seward's house in this movie. They're just living with, you know, the patients right there. At some point now, Van Helsing has been brought into the equation, and pretty much right off the bat, after looking at Renfield, he's like, "Ha! You've got vampires!" Everybody's like, "Aren't you a scientist?" He's like, "You've got vampires!" So Renfield is either brought down or escapes. It's hard to keep track of because Renfield escapes his cell every 10 minutes. He's like a dang old hamster. Just, you cannot keep him inside. So he's downstairs with everybody. Van Helsing's there, and Van Helsing shoves some wolf's bane in his face, which makes Renfield freak the hell out. And Van Helsing again is like, "Yeah! Vampires!" And everybody's like, should he go next door too? Should clear a room for him? What I think is kind of funny about Renfield like reacting to the wolfsbane is he's not a vampire. It's never really explained why he wants to eat bugs and like reacts to like wolfsbane and stuff like that. In a lot of other sources, it's implied that Dracula is like feeding him his blood, so he like has a little bit of vampiric tendencies, but I mean, he's just a human who wants to eat bugs, so I don't know. So that night, Dracula comes to get snacking on Mina this time, and he goes through all these like hypnotic lengths to like get into her room. Now, if it was me, you just gotta ring the doorbell. Well, yeah, come on in here, come get y'all's juice. Like, I'm the perfect candidate. Any vampires that may be watching this, hello. But anyway, he gets to snacking on her, and Mina starts acting all bizarre because she is in the process of being turned into a vampire, and apparently that just makes you start sitting there like this and like saying weird things just on the reg, I guess. Then like the next evening or the same evening, it's not really clear the timelines, but Dracula, he shows up at the house, and we very much get like a Frog Brothers moment with Van Helsing and John. So Van Helsing, he's in the mood for like a schmoke and a pancake, so he opens up his little cigar box, and the cigar box, my camera gremlin threw me off, has a mirror in it, and there's gremlins behind me, guys. Smoke and a pancake. Anyway, he opens the box, and the box has a mirror in it, and Van Helsing's like, huh? Because Dracula, he's got no reflection in the mirror. I want to know, how does he always look so cunty when he cannot see himself? The man sleeps in dirt, but he's always clean and fresh, you know, good for him. Anyway, he sees that, and he's like, "Hey, John, check this out." John's like, "What the hell's going on?" So then Van Helsing's like, "Check this out." He's like, "Hey, Drac, you want to smoke?" And he opens the box, and Dracula smashes it. He just whacks that shit right out of Van Helsing's hands. And everybody else in the room is like, "Daddy, chill." But Van Helsing, he's like, "Ah, vampire." So then, like, Dracula leaves. So that's awkward. Just had like a temper tantrum in these people's house. He gets out of there. And Mina goes to her room, but not really. She goes out to the garden where Dracula has another little nibble and then like takes off. So a maid finds Mina all passed out in the garden, and John's like, "I gotta get her the hell out of here." And Van Helsing, he's like, "No! You know what I'm doing. I'm a doctor, professor, lawyer, scientist. I know what I'm doing." He goes, "Let me watch her." And John's like, "Okay." So what does Van Helsing do? He just fills the room with wolfsbane. Like, good job, dude. You really did it. While that's going on, Renfield escapes again. And he comes down to the parlor, and he's like, "Hey, guys, Dracula's a vampire. I've been helping him because he promised me millions of rats if I helped him. Don't tell no one." Because, you know, snitches get stitches. The orderlies come back. They cart Renfield off to his room again. I don't know what the point of that is. Just let him out. He's gonna get out anyway. The best Renfield corralling technique was in Dracula Dead and Loving It, when every time he like got out and started saying like his odd shit, Dr. Seward was like, "Give him an enema." that's how you fix that problem. Later that same night, the girls are fighting now because Dracula comes back to stir the pot, and he and Van Helsing get into it, and Dracula's like, "Ha, bitch, Mina's mine now. why don't you just fuck off back to Denmark? And Van Helsing is like, I'm gonna tear down your house and get rid of all your dirt. How about that? And then Dracula is all like, come here. And Van Helsing's like, nah. Dracula like lunges at him, but Van Helsing, he got that crucifix. So Dracula's all like, oh god, no. And then he leaves. I love this movie. Like a few minutes later, like this is all happening at the same time. What kind of Real Housewives type shit is going on in Dr. Seward's sanatorium? Anyway, we see John and Mina on the terrace, and Mina is still being like a little weirdo, and it's clear she wants to like bite John. This bat starts flying by, and it's like, and like Mina's like talking to it, and John's like, who the hell are you talking to, while he's swatting away this bat. And then she attacks him. But John needs 2 men to save him from this tiny woman. So Van Helsing and Dr. Seward, they pull her off, and then she admits that Dracula's been using her like a Capri Sun, and is like, sorry John, I can't be with you anymore. Now honestly, if you would not leave your fiance for Dracula, I don't trust your judgment. She is making the right choice. So then later Dracula kidnaps Mina, and no one realizes this until they see Renfield taking off through the field towards Carfax Abbey. He's getting the hell out of there. So of course, you know, they all go to follow, and then Dracula is like, hey Renfield, what the fuck? You led them to me. And Renfield's like, no I didn't. But Dracula kills him. R.I.P. to an absolute king. He will be missed. Well, this must all be happening near sunrise, because just all of a sudden Dracula's like, okay, sleepy. Night night, gonna go lay down in my coffin. So Van Helsing just like stakes him through the heart while he's asleep like a coward. Coward. Mina goes back to normal, and that's it. They all live happily ever after, except for Dracula and Renfield. Rude. So let's talk about it. Obviously, we all know that this movie has been adapted from Bram Stoker's novel, which came out in 1897, but not really, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But you may think this is the first time we have seen Bram Stoker's novel adapted for the big screen, but it's not. Nosferatu in 1922, a silent film, obviously, was the first to adapt Stoker's novel, but they didn't do it legally. They really didn't get any rights for it at all. I guess they thought if they changed the names a little bit and changed the ending and, you know, changed the vampire's look, that it would be okay. It was not, however, because Florence Stoker, Bram's widow, she went crazy, sued them for plagiarism, copyright infringement, whole 9 yards, and she did win. So she ordered every single copy to be destroyed. Obviously somebody saved one somewhere along the way, because I would say a good chunk of us have seen Nosferatu. It is definitely something you can find, and the original I'm talking about, you can go watch Werner Herzog's if you want to as well. That one Florence didn't get her little hands on, but I mean, I get that it was her husband's work and they should have asked, but it's not very cool. And that's why Joe Bob Briggs always says fuck Florence Stoker. Okay, now Universal did actually obtain the rights for Dracula. They paid 40 grand for not only the rights to the novel, but also all of the stage plays as well, so they could have total free reign over Dracula and not face Florence's wrath. Which, if you want to know, like in today's standards, we're talking that's like $825,000 that they paid for the rights. Now, the original writer, his name was Louis Bromfield. He wanted to do a close to novel adaptation. He was replaced for whatever reason, I'm not really sure, and they brought on Garrett Fort, who wanted to adapt the stage play instead, which is why it is completely different from the novel pretty much. When it came to the role of Dracula, you may be extremely surprised to learn that Bela Lugosi was not their first choice. The studio had a whole list of people. He was not even on it. They cycled through a lot of actors. Some died in the process. They wanted Lon Chaney Sr. to play the part. I believe he also passed away before they got to filming. And they were just kind of like sitting around twiddling their thumbs like, who are we going to get to play Dracula? Well, at the time, Bela Lugosi was playing Dracula on Broadway in the stage production. Some of the crew members went to see it, and they were still like, eh. Do you not watch that man? What do you mean, eh? It took a lot of lobbying, even on Lugosi's part. He was like, hey, I want this. Can you give it to me? He even agreed to only have a salary of $500 a week. That was it. He was not even the top billed for this movie. Mina was. Helen Chandler, I believe. Like, alright, I don't know why, but you go, queen. That was weird for 1931. So in the end, he only made $3,500 for the entire film. The whole casting process in and of itself seemed to just be messy. Like when it came to the role of John Harker, again, they cycled through a lot of guys. And before they landed on David Manners, they dropped the man that was hired before him because he was getting a divorce. So they were like, no, we're divorcing you from this movie as well. Bye. It's kind of cold. And the director was also acting sort of messy. Tom Browning was known to just dip from production for like days on end. So the cinematographer Carl Freund, not Freud, Freund, he actually did most of the directing, but he was not credited for that at all. He only got the cinematography credit, but most of the cast was like, nah, he did everything. Like, could we replace his name? Very Tim Burton of you, Todd Browning. Listen, Hollywood has just always been a cesspool. We'll just leave it at that. Now, most of the cast, they were not fans of this movie. They just straight up didn't care for it. Like, David Manners said he never even saw the finished film. Helen Chandler, she wasn't a fan. Edward Van Sloan, who played Van Helsing, and even played Van Helsing on stage opposite Bela Lugosi, he didn't like it either. In a letter to his nephew, where his nephew was like, hey, sorry, Unky, I haven't seen your movie yet, he was like, that's okay, you're lucky not to. I disagree, but to each their own, I guess. Weirdos. Despite this movie being somewhat of a challenge to film for reasons I kind of already mentioned, and special effects, they were a lot harder to work with back in 1931, like barely even a thing, Some of the actors, Mr. Lugosi, were a bit eccentric, so it was kind of a challenge, but the movie, it was a critical success, proving a lot of the naysayers wrong. A lot of people thought this movie would be too shocking and horrific for American audiences to deal with, but this movie brought in $700,000 at the Roxy Theater in New York, where it was premiered. They weren't doing nationwide things back in 1931 like they're doing today, so that was actually a really big deal, and critics said they loved the creepy atmosphere, and of course they loved Lugosi's performance. Despite being very dated with its choppy camera work and giant rubber bats, Dracula has withstood the test of time. It is still an influential classic. There are countless movies, books, TV shows that use the Dracula name. As a matter of fact, I bet when people hear the name Dracula, the first person they picture is Bela Lugosi. Okay, if you picture Christopher Lee, you're cool. I get it, you're cool. But me personally, I picture Mr. Lugosi when I hear Dracula. So, speaking of movies carrying on the Dracula legacy, let's talk about the Coppola film really quickly. Alright, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. Widely regarded as a top-tier movie. I enjoyed this movie. It is a go-to rewatch. If it's on the TV, I'm staying. I'm watching it. If it's free on streaming, like I just watched it not too long ago. I like it. But it's not a good movie. It's really not. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I'm going to get a steak through the heart for saying it, but okay. Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder, right? Very talented people. Neither of them can do an English accent for shit. Like, it's beyond awful. At least Winona gives us a fascinating Mina. Like, she's still fun to watch, even if her accent is terrible. Keanu gives us nothing. It's like the most bland Jonathan you have ever seen. Like, girl, you got brain fever and you're still boring? Like, I know that probably has a lot to do with the writing, and I like Keanu Reeves. He's a very nice man. I'm not knocking him, but my God. Now, Gary Oldman. I know a lot of you hoes think he is the best Dracula to ever exist. He is a ham. That scene where he is all mad because like Mina rejected him, and he's like, wind, wind. What was he doing? I will say the subtle scenes, the subtle, like, more romantic scenes where he's a lot more toned down, that's when he seems like Dracula to me. That's when I think he does a good job. But when he needs to be, like, powerful and intimidating, I'm just like, like, girl, what are you doing? I may be biased because I do not like him as a person. But it was funny. But Anthony Hopkins, love that. He's always just a weird little freak, you know. I love how his Van Helsing's just always going, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's my take on Coppola's Dracula. Let's get back to 1931 now. So Bela Lugosi took the role of Dracula very seriously. However, after the film, he really did not want to play Dracula again. He didn't want to be typecast or just kind of shoved into a little box, I suppose, which is kind of a shame on his end because that is pretty much what most of us know him for. If you watch any of his other films, he is a very talented man, and it is kind of a shame that he did just get pigeonholed. However, I hope he knows that from the beyond, how much all of us weird little freaks really love and cherish his performance, and I think it's something that he should be proud of. And I do think he came around in the end, considering that he is buried in the ground wearing the Dracula cape, so I think he ended up being okay with it. So yeah, as I was saying, he was very into the role. He had a ritual before scenes would begin filming. He would stand in front of a full-length mirror and like start swishing his cape around, and he would yell, "I am Dracula!" Just, you know, give a whole little performance to the mirror before cameras started rolling, which made a lot of his castmates like giggle and kind of like snicker behind his back, like, what's he doing again? But hey, whose name out of everyone's name do we remember? So maybe it pays to be a little bit eccentric. But a lot of the other castmates, they said that he was polite enough. They thought he was a little bit weird. They thought he was kind of snooty. They said, you know, he would show up to set in the morning, he would say good morning to everyone, he wouldn't really talk to anybody during the day, and then he would leave, he would say good night. But I think I need to point out in his defense, he did not know much English, like, at all. He learned English pretty much by being in movies. It's like, you know, when you're just sitting there thinking, you know, in Hungarian and everyone else is chattering around you in English, you're probably just going to be like, I'm going to sit here and go keep to myself. But he was known to be a very serious man as well. It's a story I kind of like from the set of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which if you have not seen that, please go watch it. I love it so very much. So of course he's playing Dracula in that film, and on a lot of the Abbott and Costello sets, they would have a set jokester who was basically paid to keep the mood light and funny, and they would play like little pranks in between scenes to just keep people laughing. Well, Bela Lugosi, he loved this when it was not directed at him. So if he was watching someone else getting pranked, he was sitting there chuckling about it. But there was one instance where Dracula's descending the staircase, and this jokester is like behind him, you know, like how Snoopy does, like imitating him coming down the stairs. And Bela like swings around. And he yelled something like, "We're not here for childish games," and he stormed off the set for like several hours. kind of big diva behavior going on there, but hey, he came back eventually, and they did not prank him after that. Alright, but back to talking about actual Dracula. With old movies, a lot of the proverbial tea, it gets lost to time, it gets tossed in the harbor, and we don't get a lot of it. So I wish I had like more behind the scenes stuff, specifically about Dracula to tell you guys, which is kind of why I'm veering off course with different movies, but you know, it is what it is, 1931. But even so, even though it's still so old, it remains to be such an influential movie, not just on the vampire genre, but on the horror genre as well. And for a very, very long time, I kind of talked about this a little bit in my Lost Boys movie, Lost Boys video. I did not make the Lost Boys. Wish I did. But I kind of talked about this in that video, that the Lost Boys was the first time we saw vampires not be suave and sophisticated. Like, it took until, when did that come out? 1987? From 1931 to 1987, we had these suave, debonair vampires, and this version of Dracula is what we have to thank for that. And I think we still get like a little taste of that. Now we just kind of get like sexy pretty boys. the Twilight Vampire Diaries True Blood effect is what has taken over now. So I'm hoping at some point we will cycle back to the suave vampire, which we are kind of getting with Interview with the Vampire series. If you are not watching that, go watch it. Like, watch this video first. Then go watch it. Amazing. Maybe I should. We might talk about Interview with the Vampire at some point, but back to what I'm saying. There are vampire cycles, and this is what influenced the cycle for decades, which is kind of amazing. What else is amazing is this movie has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. I actually just randomly looked up last night. It's like, does anything have that high of a score on Rotten Tomatoes? There are a couple of 100%. Pinocchio is one of them. This is not me knocking Disney movies. I love Disney movies, but Pinocchio? Anyway, it only has an 82% audience score, but that is still pretty significant, especially when we're talking about a movie this old. Like, we were just coming off the silent movie era, and that is very much apparent in this movie. This movie does not even have a score, a musical score. The only music heard is an excerpt from Swan Lake at the very beginning, which they also used in Universal's The Mummy as well. I mean, it kind of makes sense for Dracula to use the Swan Lake music. Why wouldn't they use something Egyptian for The Mummy? Tchaikovsky, not Egyptian. But anyway, a score was added in 1998? Yes, 1998. I have never seen that version, but score does do a lot for movies. You don't realize kind of how important it is until you watch a movie without one. But even so, this movie still is phenomenal, even though it doesn't have that dun 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 in the background. You know? Now look, I know a lot of people, young and old, I'm not just pinning this on the youngsters, but I know a lot of young people don't like to watch anything made before 1990, especially if that movie is black and white. But I really do encourage any young horror enthusiast to go watch this movie if you have not seen it yet. I mean, it is a staple of the horror genre, and it's just a movie staple in general. Like, pretty much anyone you meet knows the name Dracula. That is how saturated into media he has become, which I could make a whole movie. Why do I keep saying movie? Am I manifesting for myself? I could make a whole video just on the influence of Dracula in the media. Let me know if that's something you would be interested in. Side note, it's hilarious to me when like children or anyone uses a Dracula to just refer to vampires in general. Like one time I was with a bunch of kids and they're all looking out a window and I was like, what are you guys looking at? They go, there's a Dracula out there. It cracked me up. But that is how influential the name is. That about does it for today's episode of Horror Chats. What are your guys' thoughts on Dracula? Do you agree with any of my hot takes? No? Sorry, not my problem. If you have not seen this movie, I highly recommend you go and watch it. It's not currently streaming on anything, but I don't know if that doesn't stop a lot of you guys. But if you want to be legal about it, you can rent it on Amazon for $3, which is not too bad. But thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you are following me on TikTok and Instagram as well at its_Haley Adams. I actually did a poll on my Instagram to decide the topic of today's video. So if you'd like input on future videos that suggest, you hop over there. Give me a little follow. If there is a movie you are just dying for me to talk about, let me know in the comments. But that does it. I gotta go. I'm having an old friend for dinner. Wait, no, wrong movie. Dracula would totally say that though. He and Hannibal Lecter would be besties. Somebody write a fan fiction about that. Go ahead, do it. Okay. Well, I will be seeing you guys in your dreams today. Goodbye. Alexa, play Bela Lugosi's Dead. Ugh.